I'd like to introduce you to today's guest, Jennifer Drago. For over 30 years, Jennifer has served as a corporate strategist, operations executive, and award-winning planner. Her work has helped healthcare, senior living, and nonprofit organizations implement a laser-focused vision and data-driven strategies to guide their growth. She has a track record of launching innovative programs in fiscally responsible manner, including a nationally recognized care transitions program. I can't wait for you to hear the interview today. Tune in to hear our conversation with Jennifer Drago. Hey y'all, Trisha Stetzel here, and I serve those who are serving others. So welcome to this week's episode of Serving the Community podcast. I created this podcast to highlight people and organizations in our own communities who are serving others and giving back to make our communities, our country, and sometimes even the world a kinder place to live. And serving doesn't just make your heart feel good. You've probably heard that some studies have shown that there are mental and physical health benefits to serving, like reducing depression, lowering blood pressure, and even lengthening your lifespan. Putting other people's needs before yours also strengthens your relationships. It connects you with the ones you are serving. And if that someone is someone you know, it creates a stronger bond with them. Serving also enriches other people's lives. And perhaps the best benefit of serving is the chance that person paying it forward. If you help someone, they're more likely to do something nice for someone else that day. Your one act of kindness could have a major domino effect. It's like the pebble on the pond, creating that ripple effect. Now, it's time to talk to our amazing giver this week. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Serving the Community podcast. I've got Jen Drago on with me today from Peak to Profit. I'm really excited about having you, Jen. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's just dive in to who Jen is and why Peak to Profit.
Sure. Well, it's really about helping nonprofits and elevating them from a performance standpoint, from a strategic standpoint, from a governing standpoint. I've worked in nonprofit organizations for almost my entire career, over 30 years on the corporate side of things, predominantly in healthcare and senior living. But I have also founded two nonprofits in my area, and I'm now consulting with nonprofits through my consulting business, which is called Peak to Profit. And I help them with a number of things, from revenue optimization to planning programs and services to analyzing their life cycle and where they are in that life cycle, strategic planning. And then also I do a lot of work with governance and boards and how to make boards more effective, because boards are the key to a nonprofit's competitive advantage.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I know pre-recording talk, you and I had a couple of times that we engaged in talking about this, and I'm such a proponent of nonprofits having organizational structure. Yes, there's a board of directors. Yes, there may be a chairman, or there may not be in some cases, but having somebody like you come in and really guide them through this strategic planning and the governance and what should that look like. I have had the blessing to serve on many boards, and some of those boards were what I would consider a working board.
Mhm.
I'm sure some of you are like, yeah, I know what that is.
Yes.
And then others have more oversight structure, and that seems to serve some of these bigger nonprofits better. So, Jen, let's talk about the importance of running a nonprofit like a true business.
Yeah. Well, let's start right there with governance, because it is, I mean, as a nonprofit, you're actually required, right, to have a board. And so I know that your listeners may be in all different stages of development, from early startup to maybe a more mature organization. But what you described actually is actually kind of a transition, some transitional phases that boards go through. So your board actually has to grow with your organization. And if somebody is a founder of a nonprofit, sometimes they aren't always thinking, they're thinking about growing their programs, thinking about adding to their teams and growing their teams. They aren't always thinking about growing up that board. And it's very common for boards in the startup phase to be more of that working board, because you don't have as many staff members at that time. But then as the organization progresses, and I'm not even going to say gets older because there's no timeline to this, it's really a progression of maturity of the organization and its structure. The board also needs to mature with that and become more of a governing board, having that strategic oversight. So that's really, I would say, number one takeaway I think of today is make sure that your board structure matches the maturity of the rest of your organization. And if we can talk, if you like, about the nonprofit life cycle, but that's in essence what the nonprofit life cycle theory is building capacity by aligning key parts of your organization in the same life cycle stage.
Yeah, and since you brought it up, why don't we take a,
Go
a
there.
dive into that? Yeah, absolutely, because now we've piqued some interest here, a little, throwing some words around there, peak to profit. And when you talk about that life cycle capacity, what does that mean?
Yeah, so there's actually, I'll let your readers know about an organization called the Nonprofit Life Cycles Institute, and that's their website, nonprofitlifecyclesinstitute.org, where you can go and read all about this. But in a nutshell, just like any business, if you had a chance to go to business school, you probably learned about the business life cycle, which is, idea to startup to growth mode to maturity. And think of this in kind of a bell curve, right? So maturity is kind of in the middle of the curve, and then you have decline. You can have you can have termination, or you can have a turnaround. And so what the Nonprofit Life Cycles Institute does, and I love the concept that they've brought to life cycles, is if you think of a four-legged table, and so the nonprofit is that table. The tabletop is the programs that they offer, and on top of that table sits their mission. Well, what makes up those four legs? Well, one of those things is governance, as we talked about. One of those things is your business model. So what are your revenue and expenses, or how do you, bring money in to support your programs? Your administrative systems. So what systems and processes and, employee handbooks and job descriptions, do you have all those things in place? And then your leadership, your administration. And so the nonprofit life cycle concept is that if any one of those table legs isn't sitting in the same cycle, the same stage of that business cycle, that you're going to have a short leg. So like we just talked about governance as an example, if you still have a working board, and you're not really meeting as a board, and the board isn't providing the strategic oversight for the organization, that table leg is going to be shorter, and the table is going to be wobbly, which puts your mission at risk, and it can fall, kind of fall to the wayside or fall off the table.
I'm
So
thinking about those boards that stick a sugar pack or some kind of folded up napkin under that table leg, like it's going to be okay. Well, guess what? That too will deteriorate. So
yeah.
bubble gum wrappers and sugar packs are not the way to control how things are in the organization. I love that framework, Jen.
Yeah, and it's truly diagnostic, right? So it's not deterministic. We do it so that we can see where we fall short as an organization and where we need to elevate certain parts of our organization, one of those table legs generally, or it might even be our programs. The interesting thing about nonprofits is the programs usually move into the maturity stage far before any of those table legs, your business model, your governance, your admin, or your leadership, because we usually form nonprofits to build programs to do something, right? So
Absolutely.
but yeah, it's a really great structure that helps you to diagnose where to put your attention.
Mhm. So Let's talk a little bit about when you say, or when most people talk about nonprofits, people think, well, they don't have money to spend on strategic planning or someone to come in and do governance. What can we talk a little bit about that and what that
Mhm.
looks like for, because I as a business coach and you as a strategist, we don't always work for free, or we don't want to always work for free because we have a business to run as well. So what does that look like from a nonprofit perspective so that they feel comfortable engaging with someone to get them to the next level?
Sure. Well, and it is when you're talking about newer startups, smaller nonprofits, absolutely hiring the expertise that can really help you get from point A to point B can be daunting, right? And so, um, but what I like to say is, especially for those nonprofits that are having a hard time getting out of that startup mode and getting into growth mode, having the right expert on your side is going to get you further faster. And so, if you can find a way to, with the help of a donor or with a grant making organization in particular, those are my two favorite ways to help pay for the services that I can provide. If you can bring an expert in that knows what they're doing, they're going to help you build that roadmap and help you get there faster. So that may be a strategic plan. It may be the things that I tend to work with nonprofits on most frequently is strategic planning. And then what falls out of the strategic planning, because we do that life cycle analysis, are the shorter table legs and how do we strengthen those. And I can tell you almost 100% of the time, governance is a big part of that. It's elevating your board and building your board for the next generation, the next stage of your nonprofit. So,
Yeah.
absolutely. And again, if you haven't built a nonprofit before, if you maybe haven't worked in the business world where some of these things are common, strategic planning and things like that, having that outside expertise and that objective set of eyes is really going to help you as the leader of a nonprofit, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you. And right now, I'm assuming there are some ears listening saying, oh my gosh, I need to talk to Jen. So would you throw out your contact information real quick here before we
Sure.
move on?
Sure. So my website, and I'm sure it'll be in the show notes as well, is Peak to Profit. So PEAKTO and then the word profit.com. And there's all my contact information is on the about page with my email. So you can always reach out that way. I'm also on LinkedIn, Jennifer Drago. You can find me pretty easily there.
Yeah, and we'll get all of that in the show notes and also tag you and your organization in our social platforms so people can just point and click and they can go on and follow you and find you because what you're doing is so valuable to these nonprofit organizations. I want to take just a little turn to talk about a podcast that you have that I find very interesting. And I think there are quite a few listeners that are in this space as well. And your podcast is called Senior Living Visionaries. Let's talk a little bit about that and why you created it and what the topics are on that show.
Sure, thank you. Yes, the last 11 years of my career I spent working in a nonprofit senior living organization, and I got to learn a lot about that industry and how we really have a lot of work to do right now to serve the seniors who are turning, 10,000 seniors are turning 65 every day. And today's seniors are much different than the seniors from the greatest generation, our grandparents and such. So we have an opportunity to serve them differently. First of all, we don't have enough brick and mortar to serve them. So we have an opportunity to build home and community based services so folks can truly age in place like many of them want to. We have an opportunity to build responsible technology to help them. That's also understandable. That's the technology piece is probably the one that's the most confusing, right, for everyone about what's needed versus how do we execute on that. So this podcast is all about building the long-term sustainability, financial sustainability of senior living organizations, and doing that by sharing innovations, disruptions in our industry, and best practices in our industry. So we mostly feature expert voices, whether they're CEOs that are doing something really great that lots of other senior living organizations can learn from, or consultants in the space that see trends and want, give us early warning signs. Again, as an industry, we've been through so much. Um, COVID combined with inflation and staff shortages, and it's a very complex industry. So anything we can do to raise the tide of the senior living industry is really what this podcast is about.
Yeah, and those numbers blow my mind, Jen, the number of people. And also, I think from my own perspective, all of my listeners know that I'm a caregiver to my mom and now my grandmother, who is in a facility, a memory care facility. And they need advocates. They
Mhm.
need someone who is out there looking, watching, seeing the things that are going on, because I'm also seeing the staff is shorthanded. There aren't enough beds. There aren't enough, you fill in the blank, in some of these facilities. And even just going to doctor's appointments and having an ear that's different from the person who's sitting in front of the doctor worried about all of the other things, right? And I think this is such a special place. I love that, Jen. Senior Living Visionaries, can you tell my listeners where to find your podcast?
Sure. Yeah, you can go to seniorlivingvisionaries.com. You can also search it on all the major podcast platforms. Or if you go to my website, peaktoprofit.com, there's a podcast link on there as well. So you can see all the past episodes.
Fantastic. I hope we can drive some more eyeballs and ears on that podcast for you, and maybe even some folks who are integrated into that space that may be able to offer some expertise in that space for you as well. Is there anything else that you'd like to touch on in this nonprofit space? I know you mentioned you had two nonprofits that you started. I don't know if those are still active and if you'd
Mhm.
like to talk about those.
Yeah, well, it was, gosh, many years ago in my youth. But yes, they are both active. One is an organization that helps support. We do spring training here in Arizona, and so I got to help our local city bring a spring training stadium out of the ground, and I helped to found the volunteer organization that does all the ticket taking, ticket selling, and ushering of those events. And so that's still going strong. And then the other is a volunteer transportation organization that helps to bring seniors to medical appointments and other appointments if they're no longer driving. It was a huge need in the area that I worked in, which is in the Northwest Phoenix area. There's a lot of retirees, as you can imagine, and lots of those folks came from other parts of the country, so they're separated from their family. So as they aged in place and couldn't drive anymore, there's a real need for transportation, and our transit here is limited. So those organizations were really great to get going, and you know. So that's really where I learned a lot about both of those organizations. Are really where I learned a lot about that nonprofit life cycle. And I'm going to sound a little like a broken record, but um, again, for nonprofit leaders that are working on operations every single day and fighting the fires of that organization, um, being able to step out and look at the organization from the 10,000-foot level will really give you a perspective on where that organization needs to go and how it needs to grow to serve the legacy that you wanted it to when you started it or when you started working there. So again, taking the time to learn more about how to build that capacity or hiring the right person that can help you move that organization forward. And a lot of the things we also spoke in our pre-time together about how nonprofits really need to adopt a lot of the business structures of for-profit businesses, right? Just because you serve a mission doesn't mean you don't have to have a margin. You absolutely have to have a margin. In fact, I'm often consulting with my nonprofit clients, and one of my messages is you need to act more like a for-profit. You need to move with urgency. You need to be adaptable. You need to be agile. We don't keep doing programs if they're always losing money. We have to change something in that equation so that the nonprofit is sustainable. So, yes, you've heard the term probably no margin, no mission. We have to make sure we have margin so we can continue to serve the mission and continue to grow.
Oh, it's yes. Oh, my heart is just opening up. Like, yes, you're saying all of the words that I fall in love with. And I believe and I hope that the listeners have heard today, Jen, that not only are you amazing at the work that you do, but you come from a place of learning. You've been there and you've done that, and that lends so much to your credibility and I believe trust. And I love talking about trust. So, as we go into the back end of this show, I always like to talk a little bit about trust and present you with a question about that because I believe that trust is essential for the success and the sustainability of any organization, whether they're for profit or nonprofit or not for profit. That trust always has to be there, whether it's a paying client or someone who's going to come in and sponsor an event or even sponsor a full mission for you.
Mm-hmm.
And because that trust is the foundation by which any organization builds relationships, operates transparently, and ultimately fills its mission, what do you believe are the key strategies and or even practical steps that
Mm-hmm.
leaders listening to today's call can take to foster a culture of trust within their organization?
It's a great question. It's really around transparency and communication. And I'm going to, go right to the nonprofit leader, but this would also apply to anybody on the leadership team. Um, there's communication and transparency that has to happen bidirectionally. So the nonprofit leader reports to the board, right? And so I've seen instances perhaps where the CEO hasn't been as transparent with the board about struggles that they have. It's the board's job to help the CEO work through those struggles and develop the strategies that keep that organization sustainable and alive and move it forward. So the transparency has to happen with the board and it has to happen with the staff that report to the leader. And so let's just take strategic plan as an example of that. So if I was working with a nonprofit on next year's strategic plan, one of the things that I love to do that does promote this transparency and this communication is, first we build those goals for the year and we make them very clear, very measurable. We have, accountabilities. We know who's doing what. And then we build a dashboard around that. This is a simple one-page, easy to view, how are we doing on every single one of our goals for this year. And that dashboard can be shared with the board each month at its meeting. So the board always knows what's going on and they can ask questions when things, and I love to use traffic lights, so if something isn't green, but it's yellow or red, that's the time for the board member to step up and say, tell me more about this. And that's where the leader can share, well, we're running into this obstacle that we didn't foresee. And the board can offer some assistance if they have ideas on how to get through that. So that's transparency at the board level. Those same goals and that dashboard should be shared with your staff members and should be shared every month because very often leaders, especially if we're doing programmatic work or again, and sometimes fighting those fires every day, we don't often talk about where we're headed. And that's the leader's job as well, is to always be sharing that vision, how we're going to get there, how everybody joins together to be part of driving that bus toward that vision. So those are some of my keys around trust, but I think it always comes back to folks being, whether they're your team members, your board members, feeling like they know what's going on so that they can trust the leader and can feel part of that bigger vision.
Yeah, I love that. So really transparency and communication are key in order to create that trust between the founder, CEO, the board, as well as the staff and the volunteers, because it is oftentimes hard to get the volunteers on board. But if they truly understand why we're doing what we're doing, it will make those volunteers want to come on board and do the thing, right?
Yes.
Much easily. Then they get on the wagon with you instead of you having to pull or push them into places that you feel like they need to be. Jen, thank you so much for joining me today. Would you once again just share your contact information or how people can find you? I'll also include that in the show notes.
Sure. So through my website, peak2profit.com, on the About page, I think my email's even there. It's jennifer@peak2profit.com. You can also reach me on LinkedIn. I post almost daily on LinkedIn, and I'm there daily as well. So you can always message me there.
Fantastic. Jen, thank you so much for being on the show with me today. I appreciate all of your wealth of knowledge that you've shared. I can't wait to dive into listening to your podcast. And I hope that you'll come back so we can have another conversation about senior living and creating some awareness around that as well.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
Wonderful. And that concludes this week's podcast, Serving the Community. Thanks so much for listening today. There are so many great things about our modern world, but the people in it should be at the top of that list. Taking a genuine interest in your family, friends, neighbors, and even strangers is one of the most rewarding decisions you can make for yourself and those around you that you choose to serve. If you enjoyed this episode of Serving the Community, be sure to subscribe so that you're notified when a new episode is posted. Please rate and review this episode and be sure to share with your connections. You can also find out more about what I'm up to at trishastetzel.com.